So the truth about men who give the bare minimum, right? When his effort doesn't match his words. So have you ever sat there and realized that you're loving someone who is barely trying? You come to realize you are the only one holding up the relationship while he's doing the least. You start conversations, you plan dates, you should suggest ideas, you try to resolve conflict. It's like you keep the bond alive, yet he gives the bare minimum. He could say that he loves you and that he cares about you, like, and when he say that, he makes it seem like that's okay for him to be complacent. That's okay for him to give the bare minimum just because he's saying he loves you and he cares about you. But love without effort is not love. That's complacency, that's comfort. So you're in the relationship and you keep hoping he will show up differently, that he will see your words and that he will meet you halfway, but he doesn't. So let's talk about the reason why men give the bare minimum even when they say that they care or that they love you, right? So in this video, I'm just gonna give you the main reason. I'm gonna give you the root cause, right? The main reason why men give the bare minimum is because they are emotionally immature. Some men give the bare minimum because they don't know how to love deeply. They think that being physically present, just showing up, is enough. They don't know and they don't understand that love needs emotional effort. They were never taught how to express love. They don't know how to genuinely care for someone. They don't know how to be consistent. They don't know how to nurture someone. They literally don't know. They were never taught this. So they confuse comfort with commitment. So it's not always that they don't love you, that they don't care about you. They might actually care about you. They might actually love you, like you, but it's that they love in an undeveloped way. So a man's emotional immaturity limits his ability to love. And if we understand this issue, we would see why men give mixed signals, why they be inconsistent, and why they become emotionally distant. So the root problem is emotional immaturity. That's why they give the bare minimum. That's the root problem. So emotional immaturity is the inability, or like you don't have the capacity, or you might be like unwilling to manage your emotions in a healthy, balanced, and responsible way. It means a person often reacts to life challenges from a childlike emotional state, rather than having a stable, calm, grounded adult mindset. Instead of processing feelings or communicating clearly, they tend to act out, shut down, withdraw, blame others. So that's emotional immaturity. That's the problem with these men. That's why they give the bare minimum, right? Emotional immaturity really means poor. It means different things. It means poor emotional control. You get angry fast, you get defensive, he might shut down, he lash out. This is poor emotional control, and that is one of the reasons why they're given the bare minimum, because they can't control the emotions. They lash out, they get angry, they get defensive, and then what happens? They avoid responsibility. So being emotionally immature means that you also avoid responsibility. You make excuses for your actions. You shift the blame, he shifts the blame to you. He refuses to admit when he's wrong, right? The next thing is that they lack empathy. They struggle to understand or care how people feel. They genuinely might not know how to feel empathy. They might have had some um, rough upbringing, and they never learn how to try to feel how somebody else feel, right? And then emotional immature men, they seek a lot of attention, right? They rely heavily on people showing love for them, or people reaching out to them first, or people starting to initiate to resolve conflict first. They also fear accountability, right? They don't like conflict. So instead of having an honest conversation, an honest discussion, they would withdraw, they would lie, they would manipulate just to protect their ego, right? So that hot and cold thing that you might think is happening is just sometimes they just avoiding their accountability. Sometimes it's not deliberately trying to disappear. It's just the fear or not wanting to have a hard conversation, not wanting to be responsible for their actions, right? And they are impulsive. Obviously, they don't control their emotions. They act without thinking about the consequences, right? They dig their own grave. They hang themselves when they lash out, when they get angry, because they are impulsive and they are emotionally. They depend. They expect you to fix their emotions, and they expect you to fix conflict and manage their emotions for them. So that is what emotional immaturity really means, and that's the root problem. Now, on the other hand, men play psychological games, right? I know men play games. They test you, they test your boundaries, right? And I'm acknowledging that some men, they deliberately use control tactics, right? And it's because they lack emotional maturity and they have no self-esteem, right? So even if, well, for example, some of these control tactics are when they're hot or cold. They love bomb you, they use silent treatment, they withdraw, they disappear, they gaslight you, they use triangulation, bring flirt with other women, involve themselves with other women deliberately. They future fake, talk about plans for the future, and they know they're not gonna do it. And they test your boundaries, and they push small limits early. They push your buttons just to see how much you could tolerate, and they ignore your messages for spite, and they flirt with others deliberately and ignore your calls and do all these things. And I know that men play games deliberately, they spitefully do these things. But what I'm saying, whether or not they are doing this deliberately, intentionally, or it's unconscious, it's like subconscious, both of them are emotionally immature and lack. They have low self-esteem, right? But what I'm really focusing in this video is the ones who might not deliberately be hot and cold. They're not deliberately doing it, right? But both of them, whether or not they're doing it deliberately or they're doing it for spite, both of them lack, they're emotionally immature, right? So, but I'm talking from a perspective where they are subconsciously doing it, they're not doing it for spite, they're not using this control, they're not planning and just trying to say they're gonna use these control tactics to make you obsessed with them or whatever. I'm talking from a perspective that they're not intentionally using these control tactics, right? So emotional maturity is the ability to understand, to manage, and to express your emotions in a healthy, balanced, and constructive way, right? Even when you are dealing with stress, you're faced with conflict, you're faced with disappointment, you can manage and express your emotions in a healthy way. It also involves being able to recognize and respond to other people's emotions in an appropriate way, right? Basically, emotional maturity is when you're self-aware, You could identify how you feel and why. You don't deny how you feel. You don't suppress how you feel. You don't exaggerate your emotions. You understand your triggers and you understand your patterns, right? So I'm just explaining or showing you what is emotional maturity, or what you should be looking for in a romantic partner from a man, right? So, and while if I explain what emotional maturity is, you're going to understand more why they are giving the bare minimum, because they don't have these things. They cannot self-regulate. When you self-regulate, that means you control your impulsive reactions. You won't lash out. Instead of lashing out, withdrawing, putting the blame on you, they will pause and they will choose a more mature response, right? When you are mature, emotionally mature, you are accountable. You take responsibility for your actions, you take responsibility for your words. You have empathy, right? You see things from the other person's perspective, and that is what these men are lacking. They can't see from your perspective. They don't care how their behavior affect you. They're not resilient, right? They cannot handle disappointment, they cannot handle setbacks, they cannot handle rejection, without like falling apart or being destructive, right? If you are emotionally mature, you learn and you move forward. And you have emotional stability. You remain relatively calm and grounded even in emotionally charged situations. Your mood is mostly stable, right? And when you are emotionally mature, you have healthy communication. You can express your needs, you express your feelings, you express your boundaries honestly, but in a respectful way, instead of being manipulative, instead of avoiding, instead of lashing out, instead of being angry and aggressive, right? And they would accept imperfection. You would understand that people, including yourself, are flawed. Your partner is flawed, you are flawed. So they would not expect you to be perfect, right? They do not demand perfection, right? But as a mature person, you value growth, you value forgiveness, and you have understanding, right? So that's an emotionally mature person. That's how they should look, and that's what they should have been working on, but they don't. So that is why they are still emotionally immature, and that is why they give the bare minimum, because they have these problems. So I'm gonna explain now 6 ways or reasons why, or how it show up in relationship where men give the bare minimum subconsciously, right? So the first one is that emotional immaturity starts with avoidance, right? Avoidance. Most immature men were never taught to express their emotions, only avoid them. So while they grow up hearing, man up, or don't cry, or be tough, or forget about that, or move on, or whatever, they never really learn to sit with pain. Instead of learning to sit with sadness, pain, guilt, shame, disappointment, vulnerability, they learn how to shut down. Most of them, they learn how to shut down, withdraw, distract themselves, or even lash out. Yes, this emotional avoidance follows them in their adulthood and then in their romantic relationship. So when you try to connect on a deeper level, you might call them out on disrespectful behavior, you call him out on hurtful behavior, and you try to have a hard conversation, he will pull away. That's where the disappearing come in. That's where the hot and cold behavior comes in. Shutting down, withdrawing, or being defensive. Or sometimes they might not withdraw. They might lash out. They might start to be chaotic. They might start to create arguments. They might just be angry and aggressive. That's another way. That's immature. So they're not doing this because they don't care, but they just don't know how to feel deeply. He doesn't know how to communicate in a healthy way. He doesn't know how to resolve conflict. So they're not emotionally responsible and they're not emotionally mature. So that is why they are showing up like they're giving the bare minimum, because they don't have these tools, they can't communicate, right? They avoid. When you hear, oh, it's hot and cold, they cold because they want to avoid responsibility, right? So that's the first thing, avoidance. So the second reason why he's showing up like he's giving the bare minimum subconsciously is because emotionally immature men confuse attention with love. So emotionally immature men don't understand that relationships thrive off of emotional intimacy. They might not even know what emotional intimacy means. So emotional intimacy is sharing your thoughts and your feelings with your partner in a trusting way, in a safe way, in a vulnerable way, where there is mutual understanding and acceptance of each other. So it allows both people to share their feelings without being judged, without getting judgment, without fear, where you create a safe place between you both, where you feel understood, you feel seen, you feel supported, you feel cared for, you feel valued, right? What they do with this, what they do is they replace emotional intimacy, what I just explained, with attention, with some attention here and there. They replace it with sex, they replace it with a little validation. They would like do sweet things in the beginning, they shower you with attention, with affection when they just meet you. You feel special, but once the relationship requires emotional depth, once the relationship start to like, once you need to start to, well, after a while, when you start to get to know each other and you move on from the honeymoon phase, you need to be, you kind of need to be honest. You need to be accountable. You need to have open communication. You need to have empathy. You need to have understanding. You need to support each other. You need to have trust and consistency. And when it's time to do that, they freeze, they withdraw, they disappear. To them, when you're emotionally immature, to them, love feels like fun, love feels like excitement and giving a little attention here and there. Not emotional intimacy, not being emotionally responsible. And that is where the problem begins, and that is why they will show up like they're giving the bare minimum, right? Because they're not working on this emotional intimacy, right? They're not emotionally responsible. So emotional responsibility in a relationship means you own your own feelings and your actions. You manage your emotional reactions, knowing that it can have an impact on your partner. Instead of blaming, instead of avoiding, you communicate, right? So it's being like self-aware. You understand that you are in control of your emotions and taking responsibility for your actions and your words and how they would affect your partner. And to do this, you actually need to have empathy, you need to have understanding, and they don't have that. So you have to be willing, if they want the relationship to work and you don't want to show up like it's the bare minimum. The man have to be willing to apologize and to make amends when they hurt you, not by offloading their internal turmoil onto you. And that's the problem, why they show up like they're giving the bare minimum. And why is this important? It's important because it creates trust. It shows that you are dependable. It encourages both partners to be open and to be authentic, and it prevents conflict. So if you are gonna be responsible for your own feelings and your actions, you can't just lash out at any time. You can't just talk in any tone of voice. You can't be condescending. You can't get angry whenever you feel like you couldn't get angry. You can't say anything, you can't act anyway because you would have emotional responsibility. And that is the problem with these emotionally immature men. They have not developed themselves enough to build emotional intimacy or know how to be emotionally responsible. You have to develop yourself to get these values. Some men, they know that love and relationship, it takes effort, but they might be incapable, they might be unwilling, they might just lack knowledge, they might just lack the knowledge and they lack the experience. Or they are emotionally lazy. They're just lazy, complacent, they get too comfortable and they don't want to put effort. That's why they confuse the attention with love, right? So that's the second reason. The third reason why he gives the bare minimum subconsciously, or why he's showing up like he's giving the bare minimum, is because emotionally immature men know how to take, but they don't know how to give, because they are emotionally undeveloped. They often see relationship as what they could get from a woman, not what they could give. They crave the nurturing energy, they crave your softness, they crave your stability, they crave your reassurance, but they don't know how to offer the same thing back. They want to be loved like a man, but they still feel like a boy inside, or they're still showing up like a boy. I mean, after a while, after teenage years, you kind of have to develop your mind and have a different mindset when it comes to love and it comes to women. So that imbalance creates emotional exhaustion for the woman, because she's giving love to someone who don't know how to give back. They only know how to receive but not how to give back. So that could be exhausting, right? These men have not reflected on their past. They have not corrected wrong behavior with you or people in the past. They have not contemplated about the times where they hurt women in the past. They have not worked on becoming a mature individual. They have not worked on becoming emotionally responsible. They don't know how to give love or to show care. They don't know how to nurture. They don't know what they are doing, basically. They don't know how to be in a romantic relationship because they have not worked on themselves. They have not tried to develop maturity, right? So that's the third one. The next reason why he gives the bare minimum, why he's showing up like he's giving the bare minimum subconsciously, is that emotionally immature men, they fear vulnerability. So being emotionally mature requires being seen. That being seen is with vulnerability. So they don't want to show that they have flaws, right? They don't want to express to you that they have weaknesses. They don't want you to know that they have fears, right? They don't want you to know that they are afraid of rejection, that they are afraid of abandonment, that they are failing hard. They don't want you to know that sometimes they don't feel good enough, right? They are afraid of being vulnerable. They have insecurities and they don't want to admit that they have insecurities. They hide behind ego and pride. Men who are emotionally immature, they always have a lot of pride and ego, big ego, right? They might have triggers, they might have like love trauma from the past, and they don't explain to you what happened to them in the past, so you don't know their triggers, they don't know what's affecting them. They might have needs and they don't talk about it with you. They could avoid you. They might want space and they just take it without explaining why they want space. They don't say how much space they want, how the length of time, when are they coming back. They just withdraw, right? They don't take accountability for their actions, right? They don't take responsibility for when they mess up. They don't want to apologize and say, I hurt you, I'm sorry. Instead of doing that, they're trying to defend themselves. They create arguments, confusion, and conflict. Right? That's why they look like they're giving the bare minimum. They don't want to be truthful. They don't want to be honest. Right? So they are afraid of being vulnerable. Emotionally immature men fear vulnerability, but vulnerability to them feels like weakness. They feel like a weakness, so they hide behind their ego. They don't want to be honest with themselves. They don't want to be honest with you, so they hide behind humor. They make jokes. They detach themselves. They become defensive. Instead of having a serious conversation, they might just change the topic, make jokes, be defensive, stonewall you, disappear, not listen to you fully, interrupt you. And sometimes he's not like trying to hurt you intentionally. He's just trying to protect himself from feeling less than. He doesn't want to be seen for who he really is. He wants to look untouchable, right? So they fear vulnerability. So the fifth reason why he gives the bare minimum, or he's showing up like he's giving the bare minimum, is because emotionally immature men lack self-awareness. They don't introspect. It means that they don't reflect on their behavior. They have not developed their character. They have not worked on their personality. They have not worked on themselves. They are not trying to be better. They don't take time out to think or ask themselves, if they're in a relationship, or if they just finish a relationship or whatever. Why did I react that way? They don't ask themselves, why did I react that way? Why, how did I make her feel? They don't think about what can I do to be better? What are my weaknesses? What do I need to work on? They're not reflecting, they're not introspective. And when they don't do that, they can't be better. So without our self-awareness, they cannot grow. And love requires growth. Love requires learning, developing, making better choices, and changing to be better. So instead, they just repeat the same pattern. They push good women away, and they blame the woman and be telling them that you're too emotional or you're too much, because they're emotionally lazy and they don't want to take accountability for their actions and their words and how they show up. So they will tell you things like, you're too hard to deal with, you're too sensitive, you're overreacting, and they will push your complaints. They sweep your complaints under the rug. They might even gaslight you, pretend that what you're saying is not true, or what you're saying is not as important, right? And the real problem is that they lack self-awareness and they lack personal development. That's why they are showing up like they're giving the bare minimum. So that's the fifth reason. They lack self-awareness. So the sixth reason why he's showing up like he's giving the bare minimum is because emotionally immature men, their love is unstable, their love feels unstable because their emotions are inconsistent, right? They're not mature. Their love often feel like a roller coaster, and it's confusing because one day they affectionate and the next day they distant. Because for example, one day they affectionate, things going well, things going like how they want it to go, and then there's a issue, a problem comes up, and they don't want to take it. Might be their fault, they make a mistake and they don't want to take accountability. They don't want to apologize, so they disappear for days, weeks, months, however long. So it's avoidance, and they have confusion. So you end up in this cycle of confusion.